I bought a piece of ground nobody wanted, 12 quiet acres tucked under a stand of oaks, and 3 years later, there were 40 houses where my father used to hunt. I swear I still remember the exact moment I realized it wasn't a mistake. A perfectly paved road cutting through a 50-year-old sugar bush and a brass plaque with somebody else's name on it. That's how it started, the slow, polite theft that pretends to be progress until one morning you wake up and your whole life is on a survey map. My name is Eli Harper. I'm an engineer by trade, not a fighter, and I grew up with my hands and tools and my head full of plans that actually made sense: load paths, drainage slopes, how to make a porch stay level through 50 winters. That land was my family ledger, and my grandfather's handwriting was still in the margins of the deed. I paid taxes, I mowed the driveway in summer, I fed the foxes in winter, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because it was ours. I thought ownership meant something that paper could prove. I was wrong. The first shock was small enough to miss if you weren't paying attention. A letter from a landscaping company, thanking the residents of Cedar Hollow for their upcoming storm cleanup. I laughed it off, tossed it in the bin. But the next week there was orange spray paint on the trees, a neat line of blazes marking a future right-of-way, and a neighbor called to tell me there was a meeting about improving access for new construction. I drove up to the gate just to see, and that's when I met Marianne Kessler. She was a woman who could wear privilege like perfume. Tailored coat, dark sunglasses even though it was overcast, a smile that never reached her eyes. Behind her, a man in a hard hat passed out glossy flyers about Cedar Vale Estates and community enhancements. Marianne greeted me as if I were a curiosity in a museum exhibit, polite, measured, and already rehearsed. Eli Harper, she said, extending a perfumed handshake. You must be part of the old Harper property. Small world. We've been meaning to speak about boundary clarifications. I showed her the deed. She said, with that same rehearsed warmth, paper's one thing, records are another. She leaned in, the eye contact casual, and said in a voice that smelled faintly of lemon and legal counsel, "We prefer neighbors who cooperate." That line, "we prefer neighbors who cooperate," was a knife disguised as a courtesy. The polite invasion began then. A survey crew that showed up with a county permit that didn't quite match my records, lobbyists calling the county office with questions about the old easement, anonymous complaints filed with my employer about my disruptive presence at public hearings. Each piece by itself could be explained away. Put together, they were a net. I tried reason first. I cross-checked filings at the clerk's office. I traced chains of title. I scanned old plats with my own eyes until they blurred. I hired a local title attorney, Nora Hayes, who had the patience of a saint and the temperament of a shark. Nora read the documents, frowned, and said 3 words I'd been afraid to hear. "This is deliberate." She found a shell company, Ridgecrest Partners, registered in another state, with a mailbox and a lawyer's name that matched Marianne's corporate counsel. There were transfers timed to line up with a developer's purchase that began the week after the county rezoned a strip along the southern ridge. Someone had played paperwork like a fiddle. That's when Marianne turned from polite to surgical. A security firm started sending me drone footage of my property at dawn for insurance purposes, they said, and the footage came with captions implying I had unauthorized structures. Someone left a stack of flyers on my porch about unsafe landholders and code violations. My landlord at the time, an old friend who had lent me seed money, began getting calls. The first night my cabin door was kicked. Nothing was taken, but a hammer was left on the kitchen table like a punctuation mark. The message was clear: you're alone. I remember standing in my kitchen, the hammer cold in my palm, thinking about the ledger my grandfather left me and the way his handwriting looped at the end of a line like a signature that meant, "This is ours." I could have left. I could have sold it off quietly, cashed the grief, and moved on. Instead, I planted my feet and started to document, not impulsively or theatrically, but the way an engineer documents: timestamps, high-resolution photos, GPS coordinates, a chain of custody for every paper that crossed my desk. If they wanted a war of records, I would fight it exactly where it mattered, in ink and in evidence. Nora and I dug up an email trail that smelled like blood. At first it was just scheduling, contractors, permits, meetings. Then we found a memo, an internal Ridgecrest message that said, plainly, "We expect favorable action following the Kessler outreach. Make sure easements are handled." The language was sloppy enough to be a mistake, precise enough to be a confession. I remember my hands trembling when Nora printed it. One sheet of paper, 100 years of family memories on one side, and a developer's signature on the other. We tried to use the system. We filed complaints. We asked for injunctions. We went to town meetings with stacks of photocopies and a voice that, for the first time, didn't shake. For a moment it worked. The county issued a temporary restraint and the bulldozers stopped. But the stop was a pause, not a resolution. In that lull, Marianne turned the machinery of small-town pressure loose. Anonymous tips to the press. A smear on a local Facebook page, Eli Harper, self-styled landowner, suspected tax delinquencies, and a private investigator who started showing up at my work asking questions about my honesty. Ridgeline's PR machine knew that if they could make me look unstable, they could make my claim look risky. The best frauds are the ones that wear other people's masks. Then came the deposition. It was the one scene that changed everything, not because a single person confessed in a dramatic monologue, but because arrogance slipped. I'll never forget Marianne in that conference room, the kind of room with short, polite chairs and a long table that's built for negotiation and killing time. She wore a blouse that matched the notepads on the table and a look that said she thought this was theater and she had the starring role. The lawyer asked a slow, polite question about the chain of title. Marianne inhaled and, in a voice like fine china, said, "We were operating under the assumption that the Harper tract included those lowland parcels. There were communications indicating consent." Her fingers tapped the table. The transcript made it look like a bureaucratic aside. But Nora had the emails, the ones where Ridgecrest executives joked about papering over Harper and where an in-house counsel admonished, "Make sure the grant is executed before objections can be filed." The jokes were casual, the plan explicit. When Nora read those lines aloud, Marianne's smile stalled. There was a flash not of rage, but of calculation, and then a different voice. "We are developers. We make deals. If Mr. Harper chooses to litigate, that's his right." It was the calm of someone who believes the law bends to power. But once you hear your enemy admit their method, the whole thing crystallizes. It's small comfort, but it's a kind of clearness. You're not paranoid, you're targeted. The media smelled blood. An investigative reporter ran a piece that painted the overlay of deeds and emails in black and white, and suddenly the county got nervous. Ridgecrest retaliated: an audit notice, a defamation claim, a late-night truck visiting the property boundaries with men who wanted to check stakes. The harassment intensified until it felt like living inside a pressure cooker. My hair thinned, my sleep fractured, and for the first time I realized the teeth behind a smile. Then someone threatened my life. It wasn't cinematic, no drawn guns or dramatic flashes. It was a voicemail left on a burner phone that had no caller ID. The voice was muffled, professional, and steady. "Stay away from the development. You're making people uncomfortable. Last warning." The line clicked. I sat with the receiver for a long time. The room suddenly small and full of very loud possibilities. What scares people is not the noise of violence, but the thought that nothing will stop it. I could have folded. I could have vanished like a bad mark on a balance sheet. Instead, Nora and I did what we always did. We made a file. We took the voicemail. We traced the server. We preserved the metadata. We called the sheriff and we signed affidavits. We started to build a tower of proof so tall that it could not be ignored: emails, drone footage, deposits, security logs, the anonymous hammer on my table. Every piece was another brick in a case that would one day be read aloud in front of a judge. The trial was not the dramatic showdown you'd expect from a movie. It was grueling and methodical and, in its own way, beautiful. The judge listened to deposition after deposition, to title searches that explained, in dry language, how ownership works and how it can be betrayed. Ridgecrest's defense attempted to confuse and to obfuscate. They pointed to zoning changes and clerical errors and tried to make the court dizzy with paperwork. Nora's cross-examination cut through it the way a well-placed bolt takes tension out of a structure: precise, patient, and utterly unforgiving. At the hearing, a man whose name I'd only seen on a file, Thomas Ridgely, the shadow investor, took the stand. He was not a man who liked being looked at directly. He sputtered when Nora asked about the memo. We never intended to deceive." It was pathetic to watch a grown man stumble on language he'd used casually in an email. The jury watched him, and in their faces I saw the arithmetic of accountability. People wired to be fair, confronted with evidence of calculated untruth. When the verdict came, the courtroom was strange and small in its intimacy. The judge read the conclusion: fraud, improper conveyance, punitive damages for the pattern of intimidation. They returned title to the Harper tract, ordered restitution, and referred criminal charges to the county prosecutor. The sound of the gavel was anticlimactic, a small wooden hammer on a wooden bench, but whatever else the city felt, something shifted. The ledger lines that had once been at risk were secure again. But victory was not a full stop. I didn't walk out and throw a party on the lawn. Some of the houses remained built. People had paid for them in good faith, bought mortgages, signed for a life that would now be complicated by legal uncertainty. The real moral problem presented itself like an open wound. What do you do with people who were both victims and beneficiaries of a fraud? Do you punish everyone for the sins of a few? I chose something that surprised even me. Instead of forcing mass evictions or chasing every homeowner into bankruptcy, I worked with the county and community leaders to create a transition plan, a community land trust to buy back parcels at cost, a grants program to help affected homeowners, and a moratorium on speculative sales until parcels could be regularized. It wasn't perfect. Some residents sued, some moved away, and some accused me of being soft on greed. But it felt like a resolution that honored the ledger in my grandfather's hand: protect the land, but repair the community where possible. There's a scene I keep replaying, not from court, but a quiet afternoon after the case closed. I walked the ridge at dawn, coffee steaming in my glove, and the valley below had the kind of light that makes you forgive the worst of human schemes. A woman from one of the houses waved from her porch. She'd been frightened through the whole ordeal, her mortgage a weight she hadn't expected. She smiled, hesitant, and I realized the story wasn't about me winning or losing so much as about communities learning how not to be prey. That's messy is real life, and far more satisfying than a cinematic revenge. If there's something to take away, and I don't claim to be a philosopher here, it's this: ownership is not just paper, it's attention. If you care for what's yours, if you keep records, if you show up to meetings and you talk to your neighbors before strangers redraw your borders, you stand a chance. The other lesson is darker. Power often hides in polite things. A smile, a firm handshake, a letter with a seal. Those are the tools of people who want to make theft look like business. I want to be clear. I'm not saying litigation is the first or only answer. I'm saying keep receipts. Talk to people. Build a file that could survive a decade of obstruction. And if you ever find, like I did, that someone has been quietly translating your life into their ledger, don't assume it will stop on its own. So what do you think? Is my solution turning stolen homes into a community trust, compensating honest buyers while pursuing the culprit's justice, or compromise? Was I right to avoid maximal retribution for the simple reason that the innocent would also be trampled? I'd love to hear your take. Tell me about the time you stood up for what was yours, or the time you watched someone else's life rewritten by paperwork. Were they villains, or just people doing what their incentives told them to do? Leave a comment with your thoughts, what you would have done if the land had been yours. If you've dealt with sideways power, HOA fights, shady developers, or the quiet ways institutions creep into your life, I want to read it. Don't tell me how to file a claim. Don't pitch legal loopholes. Just tell me the story, the part that made you angry, the part that made you learn something. If this resonated, share it with somebody who loves small-town dramas or who needs a reminder to keep their receipts. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. I'll keep telling them.